to another episode of Mindset Over Matter. I'm your host, Gabby Gooding, and today I'm really excited to have Steve Gardner, founder of the Ivy League Challenge, joining me today to dive into the topic of how to find your purpose. So welcome, Steve.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
So am I. Thank you. And just as some context for our listeners, I have to just mention that I met Steve in a leadership class that we took together at Harvard a few years ago. And we must have had a conversation about finding our purpose as leaders or something along these lines. And Steve, I remember to this day that you took the time to explain to the group the process that you use with your students as part of your work at the Ivy League Challenge. And
Mm,
it completely changed how I thought about finding my purpose to the point that I remember it to this day. So
amazing.
I certainly won't do it justice to try to explain. So why don't I turn it over to you to share what the business is about in general, and then if you don't mind sharing the three-phase process that you lead your students through.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, thank you so much. And what a great way to start this off. I had no idea that we had some, random conversation years ago that had such an impact on you. That makes me feel amazing. And so thank you for sharing that with me. But I mean, of course, I remember our working together in our small group and our projects and everything that we did in class. Just didn't remember that one conversation. But yes, I lead a organization called the Ivy League Challenge, and we do early college prep. So that means we work with students, in grade 8, 9, 10, and 11. Before kind of that, once you're in grade 11 and you realize that you've got a lot to do, sometimes you're already overwhelmed and it's already really, really stressful. But what we like to do is just remove all of the stress, because actually college prep can be the most meaningful, the most rewarding journey in the world. It can be this, because high school students and middle school students actually do care about where they go to college. And they do have this understanding that admissions officers are going to be evaluating them and evaluating their application to decide where they go to college. It's this wonderful opportunity for the high school student to say, well, have I ever evaluated myself? Am I presenting myself as the person that I choose to be? Am I presenting myself as the person that I hope I become? And that's just an incredible opportunity that I don't think exists outside of college admissions, for students, for high school kids to stop and ask those kinds of questions. And instead, what most high school teens do is they ask, how am I supposed to prepare for whatever the next assignment is, the next test is, the next whatever is? And that leads to, well, now I'm in junior high, so I better work really, really hard because high school is coming. And then you get to high school and it's, I better work really, really hard because college is coming. And there's no stopping and asking, am I becoming the kind of person that I choose to become? Am I living the kind of values and the kind of life that I hope people remember me for? Like, there's no room in that to ask those questions. And so people ask, how do I prepare for high school? Now that I'm in high school, how do I work really, really hard so I can be prepared for college? And students have this idea in their minds that, once I get to the next thing, if you're in middle school, then the next thing is high school, or if you're in high school, the next thing is college. Once I get to college, then life really begins. That's when like the important stuff starts. So right now, my job is to prepare so that when the important stuff begins, then I'll be ready and then I can live my real life, sort of thing. And of course, you and I can smile at that because we remember thinking that when we were that age. That's what all the adults and all the models around us were modeling and were teaching. So it's not strange that high school students do this, right? But we remember doing that, and then we also know what happens in college, right? You get to college and it's, you better work really, really hard because either graduate school is coming or medical school is coming or law school, or the real world is coming, or your first big career thing, or whatever. All of these kind of, this message just keeps perpetuating. And it doesn't stop in college. It doesn't stop in your first job after college. You better work really, really hard because your first promotion is coming. Your first management position is coming. Your first this or your first that is coming. And we live our lives. We live our whole lives preparing for the big thing that's going to come without stopping to ask, am I becoming the person that I would choose to become? Am I living the values that I want to be remembered for? Right? Am I the person that I want to be? And if we don't stop and ask those questions, we're not going to intentionally guide our lives in a way that allows us to live that way. And so I say there's no reason to wait until a crisis in the family that shocks you to wake to out of your trance, or a midlife crisis, or some other, there's no reason to wait until you're on your deathbed before you figure out, how do I want to be remembered? What is my legacy? Those are questions that, once the prefrontal cortex just begins developing at age 13, 14, young children are able to, young teens are able to think abstractly. And once you have the tool that's developed enough, if you ask someone and they're 7 or 8, what legacy do you want, what are your core values? They're going to say, sprinkles and unicorns or donuts or something like that. But by 12, 13, 14, the brain has developed enough that we can think abstractly enough. We can get out of ourselves and start to think about values. We can think about what matters most. And why wait any longer than our biologically allowed, start point to figure this out? Because we already kind of hinted at this earlier, which I know I can talk for a long time, so feel free to stop me at any point. But we talked earlier, right, about when you're in middle school and your whole job, you think, is just to prepare for high school, and then high school for college. It doesn't have to be. We might think that we're not qualified yet to live our values fully. We're not qualified yet to make a difference in our community. I can tell you with 100% certainty, without any even fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent of uncertainty. There is zero uncertainty, because I have seen so many young students do amazing things. We can make a very meaningful impact in our community at a very young age. Mm-hmm. And that impact can be because of our age, our lack of experience sometimes. Sometimes the perspective that we bring is exactly the perspective that's missing to solve the problem. And we bring that perspective because we're not, quote unquote, qualified. And I've seen that happen over and over again in the Ivy League Challenge. So what we do, I've kind of shared a lot about why I do what I do. But the what is, we take these teens, once they're, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, teens who have some idea, some ambition, some desire to be more competitive for college or to earn more scholarships for college. And we go through 3 phases. And that's what you described there. The first phase, we need to figure out your core values. That's the foundation of everything. That's the foundation of a successful life, period. And that's the thing that we kind of stopped early on. Sorry, I'm going to bounce back one more time. Professionals do the same thing, right? One of the reasons why so many kids prepare for some future day when life is going to begin to be more meaningful is because all the models in their lives prepare for some future day. Okay, so it's not like this, if we live this strategy through high school and then college, that suddenly, we are going to go and make an impact and be, once we're more qualified. Generally, humans don't do that. We don't do that until we're intentional about it. So in phase 1, we figure out what your core values are. That's the key to so much meaning and success in this world, that we just start there. That's also the key to a successful college prep. And we probably won't get into why that is here, but there's, the traditional strategy that most high school students do, taking the hardest classes, getting good grades, near perfect test scores, demonstrating leadership in as many ways as possible throughout their school, creating some kind of wow factor or spike or standout factor, X factor, whatever they call it. Like the traditional strategy of becoming competitive for really selective colleges is really exhausting, and it's really ineffective because everyone else is doing it, right? It's really shocking how I don't need to know where you're from in the world, and I can tell you what your guidance counselor said you should do if you want to be competitive for a highly competitive school. I know exactly what they tell you because everyone says the same things, and then you talk to the admissions officers and they just can't believe why all 40,000 of these most, the best grades and best test score students all have very similar looking applications that all feel the same. They're all these teens that are so busy being the best at everything that they have no time to figure out who they are. Mm-hmm. And so I won't go beyond that into why this is such a strategic move as well. But figuring out your core values and being able to communicate your core values to the admissions officer actually takes you out of that pile of applicants, the 40,000 of applicants who all look kind of the same, that tried to stand out by doing the same things everyone else did, but doing them better than everyone else. But everyone's trying to stand out by doing the same things better than everyone else. And oh, it's just a nightmare, right? Really anxiety inducing and toxic and stressful. And so you want to get out of that pile of 40,000 applicants and into the pile of really, thoughtful, whatever person with these core values. That's the pile you want to be in. That's only 8 people deep, right? So you want to be compared against those 8 people, not the 40,000 where you're going to get lost. And so anyway, it's very strategic to figure out your core values. Then once you figure those out, we can move to phase 2. Phase 2, we identify a problem in your community, a problem in your environment that violates your core values, something that makes you angry or breaks your heart, that just isn't right. And we say, well, let's take you through the 9 different frameworks that, from design thinking, these different frameworks that different industries use to solve different kinds of problems in the world. And you decide which problem violates your core values enough that you want to start working to solve that problem. And we actually begin working to solve real problems in the real world. And yes, this begins with 12 and 13 and 14-year-olds, 100%. And then finally, in phase 3, that's when we begin to talk about admission strategy. How do you communicate your unusual, self-awareness, your core values, all of those things? How do you communicate that to the admissions officer? How do you communicate your unusual community impact to the admissions officer? How do you get the right letters of recommendation, write the right essays, build a relationship with your admissions officers? How do you network with professors who are also solving the same problems that you are, so that you can tie in research and academic curiosity to your impact project? There's all these kind of strategic things that we learn about in phase 3 that immediately and clearly tie in the stuff that brings out the best in you just in real life, and ties that into how does this apply to a college application. So that's what we do in our course called the Ivy League Challenge.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I've got lots of things to say on all of that, but just to your last point there, before I forget it, I love that when I could just picture an application that, is supported by these wonderful things that you're helping students with, and being able to communicate their value, not just to the school, but to their community. So you're almost thinking beyond the degree to show that you're going to be a good community citizen, and that your values align with what I assume the college wants their graduates to align with already. So It's like you're thinking 2 steps ahead, and showing how you're going to add value beyond even just the degree. And
that's important because the admissions officers are also thinking 2 steps ahead.
Right.
You may remember, I don't think it's possible to earn a degree at Harvard without learning that 8 US presidents went through Harvard. I mean, why did we hear that so many times? Because Harvard cares that 8 presidents went through Harvard, and they care that the second highest college was Yale with 3, right? And that's like, bragging rights or whatever it is, but Harvard cares how many Nobel Prize winners it produces, and how many New York Times bestsellers it produces, and how many CEOs, and how many presidents, and how many, all of these things. It cares. And it's trying to figure out which of these high school students is going to be the 9th US president to come through Harvard. And they're trying to figure that stuff out. And so if you can show a track record of solving real problems in the real world, then you're far more likely to solve the kinds of problems that lead to a Nobel Prize, or lead to a new company or something else. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think too that knowing, so I went through this exercise even just for myself on writing down what my values are. And I know we had to do something similar for our leadership class as well. It's such an important thing to force yourself to think about and to write down, because I think that the awareness that comes from that helps us even recognize opportunities that are in line with that. right? So even if, because our brains are just wired that way, that if there's
Yeah.
something that's on our mind, we are just built to recognize it more.
Yeah,
When you
absolutely.
buy a car of a certain make and model, all of a sudden you see it on the highway everywhere. Because
Yeah.
it's familiar to you. You're aware of it. You've brought it into your kind of your consciousness. So I think that's an additional value add to what it is that you're doing, where we get to bring that
That's
into
right.
awareness, right?
Yeah.
And see more opportunities as they come up. Um, and knowing how to communicate your strengths and your values is valuable beyond just the admissions process. To anyone listening who's not a student or applying anywhere, this is helpful even just for jobs, right? I mean, the job market is very competitive as well. And I don't know if that's something that you speak with your students about, but I'm sure it's like the skills that they learn through this process is so highly transferable to being able to advocate for themselves or to market themselves well in the job market.
Yeah. We mention it in passing. I'll tell you, it is interesting to me because I've had guidance counselors take my course before, adults that are guidance counselors, and I've had teachers take my course before. I've had, college undergrads take my course to prepare for graduate school or prepare for medical school. Any any kind of group that really wants to figure out how to stand out for the next thing, and it's highly transferable. I love having, one random adult in the classroom full of 12 to 15 or 16-year-olds, because they have such a different perspective. But inevitably 100% of the time you hear things like, oh man, I wish I would have known this when I was your age, because this is exactly what I need if I want to move up in my department. If I want to, I need to show that the problems that I'm solving are meaningful to me. And of course, I need to choose my career in the first place in a way that aligns with my core values. So that's already like
Right.
this really important piece that sometimes we don't give enough credit for. And then once I've chosen the right field and I'm moving forward in those ways, then I still become far more valuable in the open market when I'm a problem solver. And the truth is, there's problems to be solved all over the place. And most people don't recognize those issues as problems to be solved by them. They may or may not recognize the problem, but most people just don't see the world in terms of, oh, this is an opportunity for me to really stand out as someone who takes initiative and solves problems.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, adults that have joined the course have found that it's highly relevant to, a professional who wants to, again, be more valuable in the open market or wants to be more valuable in their own system, in their own company.
Right. Now, I don't know exactly what types of problems or projects come out of this program from what you've seen in your students, which I would be curious to hear about. But just as an additional question too on that, depending on the size of the problem to be solved, I can imagine that potentially some students, especially at a young age, maybe might, or actually I could be wrong about that, might not have the confidence to think that they can be the ones to actually solve it, right? Because the problem just seems too big. So
Mm-hmm.
have you ever come across that? Do you give any advice to them on how to overcome the confidence piece?
Almost always. That's one of the most common struggles. Not so that you've brought up two things. One is trying to take on problems that are too big for you to solve. And one is the confidence, maybe the naive confidence to try to take on that problem, but also the confidence in itself. So sometimes it's self-awareness that says, I can't take on, I'm not going to create a drug that's going to cure this disease that a $1 billion pharmaceutical has spent $300 million trying to develop and hasn't yet finished developing. I'm not going to solve, cure ALS or something like that today. But I even hesitate to say that. But it is true. Like some people, they feel like, my first impact project, I'll create nitrogen energy source, source energy from extracting hydrogen from water or something like that, right? Like, uh, um, and yeah, these are that's not quite how we add to the body of knowledge in the world. That's not how most solutions to most problems actually happen. Most things are very almost evolutionary,
Mm.
right? You hear about the revolutionary stuff, the disruption in the marketplace, because that's more unusual. Most of the problems that are solved are evolutionary. They're just taking the solution that we already have and making it slightly better. And so, yes, we talk about this all the time, because students often bite off more than they can chew, and that's it's hard to, if you're trying to jump all the way to the stars in one jump, and you're just trying to get low enough so you can have enough potential energy to jump all the way up, you probably never take a step. You never even take a jump. You're just constantly trying to get enough potential energy to jump all the way up to the stars, and nothing ever happens.
Right.
So one of the mantras that we repeat over and over and over again, that's really helpful for adults as well, is start small and build momentum, right? Don't buy into this idea that in order to be successful, you need to do it all, do it now, do it big, right? That's the key to success. Smarter students and smarter people in general know that that's generally not how problems are solved. Uh, it's really unusual to do it all, do it big, and do it all now. You, generally speaking, you start small, you build some momentum with something that's working, and we pivot, we move to something else. We discover, a way to pivot, or a community that's already working on this that we can lean on or connect to. There's all kinds of things that happen along that journey. That journey is never taken if we don't start with those first few steps. And
Right.
so, yeah, we do talk about that all the time. And I'll say a lot of students lack confidence when they get started, and they feel like, who am I to solve this problem? No one's even going to listen to me. And it's really exciting when they discover, and I've interviewed, dozens of these students now on my podcast, where we've talked about, what was it like when you reached out to the mayor, or when you reached out to this professor that's like really well known. And all of these students, you can hear them for yourselves in their own words, talk about how they were just blown away. Not just that the mayor or the professor or the CEO or the whatever was willing to talk to them, but that they were excited to talk to them and trying to figure out how they can support them. The idea that there's a 15-year-old out there who's passionate about solving the same problem that I've dedicated my life to, and now I've got someone that is smart and intelligent and cares about this and is working on this. You think I'm gonna, yeah, like the CEO and the doctor and the hospital president or whatever, these people that find you, or that you find, they want to support you in tremendous ways. So I'll give you an example, because you kind of started with an example, and I think that will help everyone to understand all of this. So we bring it out of the abstract and into a more concrete example. So I have a student named Corey who began this program in January of 2023. Right now, we're speaking in August of 2023. It has been 7.5 months, because it was the end of January, and right now we're speaking at the beginning of August. Barely over half of a year. And already months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, when I interviewed him the most recent time, he had already made all the progress that I'm going to share now, because I'm just going to share details. So this is literally less than 6 months of work. But when he first joined the class and he first had his idea, he thought, who am I, right? Who's going to listen to me? I don't have a medical degree. But his thing is, when we went through phase 1 and we figured out what mattered most to him, and we figured out his core values, he went back to the most kind of meaningful thing that happened in his life, which was his best friend passing away from cancer as a child. 2 years ago, his best friend died from cancer. And of course, there's all the lead up before the death as well. So this whole journey of pediatric cancer. I mean, there's few things on this planet that are going to break your heart more than pediatric cancer, right? But his best friend died of cancer 2 years ago. And he said, look, the doctors were so good at explaining the medical things that were happening. Especially, they were so good at explaining it to an adult. So if the parents were in the room, they'd explain it to the parents. They weren't as good as explaining it to kids, but they knew that they weren't as good, and some of them worked on it and they're getting better or whatever. However, I was the one who talked to my friend about his mental health because none of the doctors even knew to ask. Not once did they ask about that.
Mm.
And so he said, I know what it was like to be a pediatric cancer patient. And I know that doctors don't talk about it and I don't think they have training, because if they had training, they would probably talk about it. And so again, yeah, he didn't think he was qualified to go and advise doctors on how they should be consulting with their patients. But he reached out to a psychologist and he said, hey, this happened. He told the story. I'd like to go back to the same hospital where my best friend passed away. And there's very good doctors and I know them. I can talk to them. I think they will talk to me. Am I right? Like, is there something they should be doing when they talk to these kids? And it turns out there's a lot that they should be doing, that they could be doing. And the psychologist has all the expertise, and the kid has the story, the lived experience to share. This is what it was like for my friend. And so long story short, the CEO of the hospital, the directors of the hospital, who are all medical doctors, have now, because of Corey, invited the psychologist. The psychologist takes time away from her clinic, comes to the hospital. They meet together with Corey, the CEO of the hospital, directors of the hospital, this psychologist, and a couple of the doctors that worked with his best friend. And they have created a system that has been adopted hospital-wide now, or is being adopted. I'm not sure what stage they're in now, where every doctor now is getting training on how to ask questions, mental health focused questions of these children, and resources for where to go when they get specific answers that they need to look out for, how they should, where they should reach out for these kids to get support when they have answers that go beyond what the medical doctor should be doing. And every doctor has a little flannel board now with emotion cards, and can ask the child to put the correct emotion in the right place on the board. Like, everything is done for children to help them communicate their emotions and to train the doctors to talk about mental health with these pediatric cancer patients.
Wow.
And that's just the beginning. That's just the beginning. He partnered with another student inside the Ivy League Challenge to create boxes that have care packages. He's gotten grants to raise money, to put all the things in the boxes so that the teens, or these preteens, these kids, can have these little toys and these little gadgets and whatever else to have in between, and to learn how to use those things and how to make good use of them. So they've gotten care packages to them. He is now doing actual medical research. They're doing this as they're now creating a full-on double-blind study out of this, that they're going to send the results. If they get any kind of results, they're going to send those results to a medical journal, the kind of medical journal that high school students are not allowed to write for, that you have to have an MD to write for. But Corey's going to be the lead researcher on this. Like, this is a really awesome example, but it's an example of how, because Corey is not a medical doctor, he's uniquely positioned to solve a problem that these medical doctors aren't ready to solve, aren't even aware exists.
Right. Yeah, that's incredible. And as you were sharing that story, especially at the start when you said that he was maybe nervous to reach out to some of the higher ups or something like that, and it just made me think that there is actually, if you can get communication happening between two people with similar values, there's magic that happens when those two people realize that their values align, right? Yeah. And like you said, the CEO of the company who's dedicated their life to some certain type of work, and then somebody else is interested in that, like, that'll light a fire in you like nothing else. You don't even care if the work is for free or whatever, because that's the beauty of knowing that that's your value.
Humanity. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And great for Corey. I mean, examples like that, I'm sure, give him lots of hope and a lot of just ammunition, I guess, for the rest of his life to continue doing work like this, right? Because he,
absolutely,
even though it's almost actually better that it happened in a situation for him where he felt like maybe he was too young or he didn't have the confidence. And even despite that, it still worked out so well. Now it's like he's unstoppable Corey from the Ivy League Challenge.
That's right.
So,
That's right. As everyone else is going to be preparing really, really hard for middle school and then high school and then college and then job and promotion and everything else,
right.
they're not developing the, everything you just described, overcoming your inhibitions
Mm-hmm.
and your fears about reaching out to someone, and then reaching out anyway, and then building confidence as you begin to see success, and then solving problems and then failing and then reflecting and then pivoting and solving and succeeding
Right.
and reflecting and pivoting and scaling and all those things. Everything that I just described is something that does not happen if you're working really, really hard, because the important stuff is about to begin.
Right.
So, like I mentioned earlier, there's opportunities all around every single one of us, whether
Mm-hmm.
we're professionals or high school kids. And there's opportunities whether we see them or not. And if Corey spends his time in high school doing this kind of work, what opportunities is he going to see that his classmates are totally blind to all throughout college,
Right.
after college, and beyond? Right? It's not just that now he has this cool story because he did this cool internship or whatever. He paid $20,000 and someone mentored him to do some actual biological research. This sort of thing exists where the child is not actually developing the awareness of the problem itself, the awareness of the self-efficacy
Mm-hmm.
that he or she would need to say, I'm actually someone who could figure out how to solve that problem. The soft skills of communicating with the right people and knowing, Corey's starting to figure out, oh, when I talk to these kinds of people, things can happen. When I talk to those kinds of people, I get lots of positive, words, but nothing actually happens. So this is interesting. He's learning stuff that many professionals don't figure out until a decade or more into professional work.
Right.
He's figuring it out when he's 15,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, he's going to be able to solve problems that people around him don't even recognize. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, that's going to increase the chances, the opportunities, open new doors, and
Right.
and yeah, it's a nice virtuous cycle.
Right. And actually, I think what you're helping these students understand as well is that they don't have to wait for an opportunity to present itself in a way, because I think, when we're always working towards the next thing, it's sort of inherently implied that the thing is yet to come, and it's going to, like, we can't do anything now yet because we still have to get to the next place where that's where the opportunity is going to happen. But that next place is a moving goalpost. It never seems to happen.
Right.
So it just kind of flips their thinking a little bit too, that we don't have to wait for that end state of,
Yeah.
oh, now I can finally do important things. It teaches them to take action earlier, which is amazing. Now, I'm really curious, Steve, what made you realize that this is the type of work that you wanted to do? Like, how did you come to this realization that this is something that's valuable, that you wanted to create a space to share for students?
Well, it depends on which version of the story you want. The full story is probably more time than we have on the podcast.
Sure.
But I discovered early on that I loved teaching. Um, I always felt like teaching, though, was fun. It wasn't like a big boy job. It was a real job for other people, but it wasn't a real job for me. I don't even know if that makes sense, and
Yes.
I hesitate to take too much time on the podcast to explain all the reasons why. But I taught when I was younger and all through college. I came to China to study Chinese, but then also I paid for everything by teaching English, and I loved that. But I always felt like, it's not real, right? And so I went into business, but I went into personal development coaching and management of coaches and management of a sales floor, and I owned a personal development company, or was one of the owners, one of the, not the main owner. So that's a little bit ambitious of me to say. But anyway, um, the I was doing a lot of teaching, even though I didn't really. Uh, it was called other things. But if you do sales correctly, if you do management correctly, and if you do teaching correctly, they're all almost the same thing. It's so very, very similar. And I didn't know that until I did sales and then management. And then I ended up, I mean, I hate to tell this story because it really is a long story to do it justice, but I ended up as a CEO of a very big, a $500 million project. And I was just so busy that I my newborn son, by the time he was 9 months old, and I had a break in my schedule and could see my son, he didn't know who I was because I left every morning before he woke up. I got home every night before he was in bed, or after he went to bed. And so I didn't see him. Even I would see him, and I could see him kind of getting bigger and all that, but he didn't see me. And when he was 9 months old, and I had like a day and a half off, which really I was working 7 days a week, and it was really a busy time. I had some time off, and he didn't know me. He didn't know who I was. He was scared of me, and so I resigned. It took a while to transfer to a new CEO, but this is a clean slate at that point. I didn't really resign because I had a new job or a better offer or anything else. I just needed to spend time with my son, needed him to know who his father was, and so that wasn't time. My wife was a teacher. She was a teacher in the United States the whole time, and we said, let's go abroad and teach. And that's what I did, and that's what she did. And anyway, having done all this stuff, human development, of professional development and personal development, and then teaching teenagers and seeing this desperate need from personal development and corporate kind of professional development stuff that I had spent so much of my life doing. I said, man, teenagers don't have this, and teenagers really need this. And but if I try to say, hey, let's get back to basics, let's get enough sleep, let's do the stuff that leads to success, teenagers are going to roll their eyes so fast at you, and they don't care if you're their teacher or if you're their parent. Like, those are like the two people that they don't want to hear more advice from. Right. They want to know from their teacher what's going to be on the test, and please stop there, like nothing else. And it really feels like that. And so to kind of step outside of that, we had to arrive at college admissions. And so eventually I spent hundreds of hours interviewing admissions officers and reading every book about admissions, and the connection was so obvious between corporate development and how you succeed in the corporate world, and all the personal development training and corporate development training and professional development training that I had done throughout my history, and college admissions. Like, it's not even 50% crossover. It's like 99%. It's almost identical. And there's just these tiny differences that are unique to high school students. Everything else is so similar. And so the stuff that makes you competitive in the open market is the stuff that makes you competitive to a highly selective college. And then you have to get good grades on top of that. That's basically how it goes. So anyway, I desperately wanted to impact these teenagers in a way that was most effective, and it turns out that college prep is the way to do that. So
nice. Yeah, and that's like, I mean, it makes sense that there was that much crossover. That means that they're doing something right with the system, right, where the colleges are doing a good job of preparing you for the corporate world if they're looking for the same things, and the same things make you successful. But it's just a matter of being successful before then, to get into those colleges. So good on you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you're going to be competitive for that position, or for, to join some startup, you're not competitive because you worked really, really hard preparing for the startup. You're competitive because you've had experience solving similar problems, or you've got skill sets that align really nicely with the skills that are needed.
Right.
And so it's not about, it feels like in school sometimes we teach gymnastics by reading a textbook. And you really need to get on the mat, and you need to move your body and feel how it feels to be out of balance, so you get back in. What gymnastics are learned on the mat. And a lot of these things that make you successful in the open market, they're learned on the mat. They're learned out in the open market.
For sure. Yeah, agreed. Just another question that just came to mind, Steve, and I'm watching the time. I don't want to keep you all all day, but I'm very curious. Do you think that, so you work with students, but do you think that for anyone who's established in their career relatively, let's say they're halfway through until retirement, maybe they're feeling a little bit stuck, or they're not feeling like a lot of fulfillment, or like their work has a lot of meaning. Do you think there's
Yeah.
any benefit to going through this type of exercise and this type of thinking, or is it too late, or is it too different, I guess, once we're kind of partway through our careers?
It's no different. You have some skills, hopefully. Most likely you've been climbing the ladder and trying to move up each rung of the ladder. And what you're saying is, does it matter anymore then which wall the ladder is up against? If you've already climbed halfway up, is that really the time to stop and ask, is my ladder against the right wall? And it is, yeah, because you can climb ladders now. You know how to climb a lot better than you used to. You've got skills that you bring to the equation, and you've got life awareness and maturity and a whole bunch of stuff that you didn't have in high school. So when an adult goes through this process and figures out their core values and then asks, how do I align my daily choices with my core values? And that's going to mean work, right? How do I align my work with my core values? When you do that, work becomes so much more meaningful that you become an expert much faster than by trying to become an expert at something.
Right.
You just, if your work is meaningful to you and you think about that all day, right? You don't just like escape from work into Netflix
Right.
or whatever after work. Because if you're doing stuff that doesn't align with your core values, that's what your life is like. You're probably kind of escaping after work into something that's mindless. Oftentimes it's death scrolling on social media, or it's binging on Disney Plus or Netflix or whatever. And that's going to lead you to get to bed late because, man, the reality is once you go to bed, then you're going to wake up. And when you wake up, then it's time for work again. It's this terrible cycle. You get to bed late. Now you wake up sleep deprived. You wake up sleep deprived. You're going to be, the brain, the Sleep Science Center at Stanford and UCLA talks about how sleep deprivation has the same cognitive effect as intoxication. So you show up to work sleep deprived, which is just like showing up drunk, to one degree or another. If you're really sleep deprived, you might barely be able to walk straight. If you're a little bit sleep deprived, you might just be a little flighty, forgetful, whatever else. But either way, your learning centers are muted. You're not learning, you're not focused, you're not effective compared to what you could be if you got enough sleep the night before. But of course you didn't get enough sleep the night before because you were still holding on to the last few minutes of escape. Because once you stop escaping, once you collapse into exhaustion, then it's only a matter of time before you wake up. And when you wake up, then you're back to your job. When your life doesn't align with your core values, that's how it feels.
Right.
And so on the contrary, if your work does align with your values in some way, because you're solving a problem that matters to you, because you're developing skills that are going to lead to being able to solve problems that matter to you. Like if once work aligns somehow, you see clearly that purpose for work, then you still need other things to be motivated. You need, autonomy, you need some choice and voice over how you do your work, and you need mastery, you need to be progressing and improving. But as long as generally purpose is the hardest one to kind of connect to. I'm referring to Daniel Pink's drive theory for those who don't know, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. But really, really recommend that for those who want to increase their level of motivation and engagement at work, or the engagement of their employees. And we do the same thing with my teenagers, right? How do we add autonomy, mastery, and purpose to their schoolwork and their school day so that they can fully engage? And you do that when you align with your core values. And so once that happens, now you're excited, maybe not excited to go to work every day, but you see how it develops you into a person, and you don't have to escape after work. Sometimes you may even work after work because this thing that you're working on is really interesting and you want to finish it. I work after work after working You know, I love what I do. There's nothing I would rather spend my time doing than talking to you about why this is so important, or talking to a parent about how, if that parent just shifts their perspective to be a little bit less desperate, that take away the desperation and you're left with ambition, that's okay.
Right.
Add 1 degree of desperation to all that ambition, that's really toxic. If
Right.
we can just get you back to healthy ambition, away from desperation, oh man, you're going to be so glad. Your child's going to be healthy and be far more likely to get into that college that you are being so desperate about.
Right.
We can remove that desperation. You know, there's nothing I'd rather do with my time than work with ambitious kids and their families to try to figure out how they can be, you know, more effective by being more healthy.
Right. Yeah, and it's so true again that if we are doing work that aligns with our values, it energizes us in a certain way. And
Mhm.
it's so interesting because for those of us who go to work and we feel drained all the time, we think that it's a physical tiredness, right? You ask somebody how they're
Yeah,
doing, they could be miserable at work and they will still associate it as a tiredness, which may be true because they likely are sleep deprived for all the reasons you explained. But there is such a thing as you know, like a psychological re-energizing that you can get
right.
from doing meaningful work and from feeling good about what you're doing. So, you know, you
Mhm.
don't need to turn to the coffee, you maybe need to turn to meaningful work instead
100%.
as an alternative.
100%.
So
Yeah.
so with that, Steve, I do thank you so much for everything that you've shared. This is, I could talk with you for hours and hours on end. But just before we wrap things up, I wanted to ask if people wanted to go to learn more about you, about the Ivy League Challenge, where can they find you?
Yeah, sure. Well, the ivyleaguechallenge.com is my website. And so we often abbreviate that TILC, the Ivy League Challenge. And so the ivyleaguechallenge.com, we have a number of mini URLs that kind of help people find where I am. I do have a podcast that's at tilc.to/podcast, or you can look up the Ivy League Prep Academy podcast on anywhere, Apple, Spotify, whatever. You can schedule a call directly with me at tilc.to/meet if you've got something kind of urgent that you need to talk about. You've got a teen that's stressed out about college or whatever. I'd be happy to chat with them. Email me, the Ivy League Challenge at gmail.com. So kind of Instagram at the Ivy League Challenge. We kind of run the gauntlet. But you can generally find me at the ivyleaguechallenge.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steve. And thank you once again for joining me for this awesome conversation. It's great to see you again. Great to hear that you're doing well and
Likewise.
have so many great success stories with your students that you're working with. I do like to also thank our listeners, as always, for their time and attention. Please make sure to check us out online, subscribe to Mindset Over Matter, as well as the Ivy League Prep Academy. Is that what you called it? The podcast?
Right. That's right.
Okay.
Podcast. Uh-huh.
So that you don't miss out on more amazing episodes and great content like what we had today with Steve. So thanks, Steve, once again so much, and take care.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.